Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Rethinking Sales Motivation, a Modern Approach to Drive Growth. I'm Laura Vestal, Director of Field Marketing at Merits Motivation, and I will be your host today. Before we get started, let's go over the ways you can participate. During the webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a poll. When prompted, just select a response and click Submit. You can also ask questions at any time using the questions pane in the control panel. Just type in your question and click send, and our presenters will get to as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce Barry Kirk, Vice President of Strategic Services, and Dawn Schillinger, Sales Motivation Strategist at Merits Motivation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Hi, Dawn. Dawn and I are in two different locations today, being socially distanced as we present to you. But we're really glad to have all of you with us today as we tackle this subject. I know, Dawn, of all the audiences that we deal with at Merits, and we deal with many and varied audiences, is it safe to say, I think, that this is really your specialty, salespeople, and particularly channel sales?
Yeah, it's a specialty and it's a passion. In Merits Motivation, we talk about helping organizations tap into the untapped potential of people. And in my experience here at Merits Motivation, I found that salespeople are a wealth of untapped potential, and there's just so much opportunity to elevate how organizations connect with and really motivate these people. It's a lot of fun to work with.
And that's frankly what we want to get to with you today, is how to engage this audience. We would suggest in a little different way than when we think most companies are thinking about today, and how that will help you drive performance and drive growth. But before we get there, we do think it's important that we note that we're presenting this information, these concepts in a very different time than what most of us imagined we would be in just a few months ago. We're currently really in a market that we would say is being driven by something that at Merits we refer to as cautious commerce. If we think about it, the early phases of the COVID-19 pandemic were literally kind of a hair on fire phase. We were trying to figure out just what to do day by day. We have a colleague here at Merits who's fond of saying, you can't spell pandemic without panic. And probably some of us were doing a little bit of that early on. I hope, though, that most of us would say today we're not in that mode anymore. But we also know that many companies right now are thinking, well, should I be planning for the recovery? Winning the recovery, is that the focus I should be in? And we'd like to suggest that as we look at the market, certainly we believe we're not there yet. We still have some time ahead of us that will be characterized by a different kind of mindset with customers and sellers. And it's essentially this idea that we're in this cautious commerce phase. We're trying to make decisions about what business should look like and how we should transact it. And it really is typified significantly by a state of anxiety. And I'm guessing most of us on the webinar today can relate to that, and whether personally or professionally. There's a lot of anxiety to go around right now. That hasn't really abated simply because we've moved out of that early stage of the pandemic. And we would say it's driven particularly by two things. One is there's just uncertainty of the future. We really don't know yet what next month looks like or next quarter. We're still navigating that uncertainty. And the other thing is we are all struggling with reliable data points. Actually being able to say that the data that I'm looking at today will be meaningful to me tomorrow, I can't be certain of that. And that state of anxiety has an effect on buyers and sellers. We're all trying to make a decision right now. How do we adjust messaging so we feel like we're in sync with the moment? And that moment may be something we don't completely understand day to day. We also are probably deciding as we engage sellers, what segments do they normally sell to that are going to be more important to them right now, that are more likely to buy or more likely to be less cautious than other buyers. And then finally, I think everybody is trying to make a decision about what behaviors and practices that have been adopted during the early phases of the pandemic, during cautious commerce, will simply become part of how we do business. And sellers are not immune to that. Your channel salespeople are probably doing things differently today than they would have done if we had a different summer and a different fall. And some of those may be practices that they continue to embrace. And so I know, Dawn, that's just part of what we want to say at the outset here today, is that we are in very different times, and we need to always have that lens on as we're thinking about engaging audiences, including our channel salespeople.
Absolutely. But The reality is also, this is unprecedented times, but even before the virus, we would say that businesses were in an unprecedented period of change and of disruption. And I don't think that the COVID-19 virus has made it any less relevant, these disruptions. And the first one that we want to talk about is this workforce shift and the fact that it's evolving dramatically. We're in a renaissance of a period of behavioral science where these fields of economics and psychology are no longer just academic practices, but they are actually applied to businesses every day to better understand how workforces and customers make decisions and what motivates them. And all of that is guiding how people connect. At the same time, the workforce itself, the makeup of the people who are in the workforce, is evolving. Within the past decade, we've gone from a workforce that's been dominated by Gen X and boomers to a workforce that is a majority millennials and Gen Z. And these people have different attitudes and expectations of the brands that they connect with and the companies that they work for. And we would say, your salespeople, they're not immune to these changes. They're not suddenly more rational and more immune to behavior science than the average customer or the average employee. And you're not going to get to skip a generation and ignore, millennials' demand for a higher experience. These changes are really affecting the sales environment as well. We also have seen a demand for data-driven insights just explode. And I think COVID has made it all the more clear this dependence on data, because all of a sudden the lack of data is causing a lot of chaos. Buyers are coming into a purchase decision with a lot of information, having done their own research, and they're not just relying on their sellers or their partners to tell them what the information is anymore. New leadership we've seen join an organization, and they come in and their first question is, where's the data? What have you done? How have you proved it out? What are you doing now? And how do you know what you're asking me to invest in is going to work? And this demand for data, I think, has created a new challenge. Whereas in the past, just getting data was an issue. Now it's making sense of the data. The reality is, if new leadership is asking for data, they're going to find that most of the data that the company has is not being used in any sort of analysis. And buyers are going to have high quality research from two different organizations, and it's going to show conflicting points. So now the challenge is making sense of the data, interpreting it, and really being able to see what are the insights that I should act on from this high quality data. And all of this has really served to make the role of salespeople or the makeup of salespeople more complicated, at the same time that their job is becoming more complicated. In the past, even 5 or 10 years ago, organizations had a relatively straightforward revenue model where they were just making products and selling them. The sales organization focused on the transaction, and if they were going to get growth out of their people, it was going to be by ramping up volume, getting more leads in the door, or selling higher quality products. And so salespeople were just constantly focused on closing this deal at the highest volume possible and moving on to the next client. But that's not the reality we're in with these salespeople anymore. Companies are finding additional sources of revenue. The explosion of IoT in the manufacturing space has made clear that data is its own source of revenue. It is its own kind of revenue. So having connected products is a huge source of value. Having subscriptions and services that go along with any product sold to help maintain it and manage it is becoming a huge source of recurring revenue for organizations. And that changes how sales organizations sell. You can't just transact a service product. You're focused on more consultative selling, understanding what the customer's problems and needs are, and really solving that, bringing together the pieces and being a more active consultant in that decision. And that's asking salespeople to make a lot of changes. It's a completely different model of selling. And they have to be able to adapt quickly to business level changes that are happening at a rapid speed. It's not going to take a decade for an organization to adapt IoT. It might just take a month or a year, and salespeople need to be prepared to handle that. In connecting with those salespeople and driving their behavior and getting them up to speed with your business, we still see that an incentive program is the first and often the best tool for engaging your sales force. And the real fact is, we've seen them work. They work in driving behavior. A well-crafted incentive program can have returns of 6 to 1 or better, where you're just really seeing volume and growth. If you can get an incentive program that doesn't just push your top performers, but really moves the masses of your sales force, a small shift from 60% of your sales force can yield more than 70% revenue. A little bit of increase from a lot of people is still a lot of volume. And in the sales space or the channel space, if you're selling through a channel sales organization, your incentive program is absolutely critical. If you have an internal sales force, you have internal levers to pull. You have compensation, benefits, company culture, everything that you have to impact an employee. But a channel sales organization, those people don't work for you. They have no reason to engage with you. And the incentive program is the value prop for why they should share information with you, for why they should even let you talk to them. So that incentive program and getting it right is absolutely critical.
Okay, but this is where I get to add the reality check, right?
Yeah.
Reality check is all that being true, that your channel sales reps are in 5 different incentive programs on average, which means for every time that you're trying to reach out to them, 4 other programs are trying to do the same. Every incentive you're putting in front of them, 4 other programs are trying to incent them, get their attention, get their commitment to sell product. And so that really requires us to not take for granted what that program needs to look like and what results it's driving today. So when we think about that, we think about really 3 questions that we find really useful to ask yourself. So one is, the way you're doing work today, if one salesperson in your organization had significantly more potential to sell for you than they're doing right now, would you know that? Do you have the data? Do you have the analysis, the insight to know that? Or if that program that you're so reliant upon in the channel is underperforming its real potential, would you have a way to know that? And finally, if that program itself has data in it that could provide you with insights that would significantly impact your bottom line, would you have a way of knowing it? Do you have an approach, a strategy, a data analysis methodology that allows you to get to that information? And if the answer to any of those questions is no or maybe, then there's opportunity for you to do better, to maximize what you're doing today. But I guess, Dawn, when we work with companies, we know there's a reason that quite often the answer to all 3 of those questions is no.
Yeah, very often the answer is no, because your sales incentive programs are not giving you the information that they need, and they're not aligned to all the changes you're demanding as a business. And we'll walk through some of the reasons why. It really starts with us, with the understanding about people. And the prevailing assumption when working with a salesperson reduces them to a mercenary driver. We have this increased understanding of motivation, and we see organizations treating their employees like family. But when they start talking about how they're going to push their salespeople, it's about the dollar, and it's about driving that next behavior really transactionally. And really, this is not optimal. It's causing your programs to underperform. Assuming greed with these salespeople, assuming they're driven by the dollar, creates greed. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you put an incentive in front of every behavior you want them to do, you're teaching salespeople that anytime they need to do a behavior, they should be incented for it. And you're creating your own cycle of really dangerous behavior and reliance on incentives.
Yeah, and I think the other challenge is when we reduce salespeople to sort of just a mercenary type character, when we reduce them to just being financially driven, it also says the sale itself is about nothing but the final sale, that selling is just the sale. And we know intuitively that's not true, that in fact, there are many, many more components to leading to that sale that are really critical to getting there. But most incentive programs are still designed right now as if those other interactions don't exist, as if the only behavior that really matters is closing the deal. So it's certainly a place where we need to address to get better to create a better alignment to all this evolution we're talking about.
Yeah, and the lack of evolution in how we think about salespeople has allowed this next problem to really flourish. And this is the idea that too many incentive programs are being designed by default. And what we mean by that is they're getting repetitive. They're being designed automatically, renewed year after year. And the reality is an incentive program is incredibly complex. And we've seen in the market, it's pretty risky if you get it wrong to you, to your business, to your organization's relationship with salespeople. So most often, if an organization is doing this alone, and many of them are, it's easier to just let last year's design stand that may have been run for the past couple decades, may have been handed down from organization to organization, and let history assume the risk of change. But this too is not optimal and it's risky for your program. Having a repetitive and outdated incentive can create a really stale experience with your salespeople. They can adapt to it. They can start to mine the ways to game it. They can get bored. And the next time your competitor stands up a shiny new incentive program or a shiny new motivation strategy that's got something special to it and something exciting, your repetitive and outdated programs are going to be the first thing they drop to make space for a new effort.
Yeah, and I think the other challenge is that it also says that leaders tend to look at the rule structure of the incentive program as sort of the end all be all. And frankly, each year you just sort of pull out that rule structure from the previous year, dust it off, see if you need to tweak it and move forward. And frankly, if you only have one rule structure, you're doing better than most companies. We certainly work with plenty of companies that might have, dozens of rule structures, but all of them basically remain unchanged year to year. And again, we know intuitively there's more to engaging and motivating people than a set of rules. So that's another area where we think if you see that in your organization today, there's room for you to evolve into something that could be more effective for you.
And ultimately, the greatest misalignment is that incentives get deployed without being considered a part of a higher strategy. The incentives are deployed as an immediate solution to gain attention. And then once that attention's gathered, there's not really a strategy for how to build to that, how to create relationships. And the constant competition with competitors' focus creates this immediate need. We have to focus on what we need to solve now and forego our strategic vision and priorities for the short-term win. And this is just really dangerous. From a behavior science perspective, it risks crowding out any purpose or any reason why your channel sales partners might be engaging with you from their own desires. Having extrinsic incentive programs gives someone outside reason to engage. But if they were connecting with you because they felt connected to your brand of innovation, or they felt like you really helped them be the best salesperson they could be, you gave them a sense of mastery and achievement, if you start putting a cash incentive in front of them, all of a sudden those focuses are going to disappear. And the focus is always going to be on the cash incentive, on that extrinsic motivation. And once you've lost intrinsic motivation, once that behavior is extinct or that drive is extinct, it's almost impossible to get it back to the level it was when we started.
And at a higher level, it also likely means that if you don't have a really defined strategy, you have something that we would call incentive dissonance happening. And that may be happening even without you knowing about it. And essentially, that's the idea that if we have multiple incentive strategies happening at the same time that aren't linked and aren't measured together, you have incentive programs, you have campaigns, you have spiffs all happening at the same time, they may be counteracting each other. They may be driving behaviors in one that are actually adverse to the other. They may also potentially be at odds with the employer of your channel partner. And so it's really critical to be thinking, is your strategy something where everything is integrated, or are mostly all those pieces today operating independently, doing their own thing, and maybe operating at odds with one another?
So it really creates a tangled mess. And it does end up looking a lot like this picture where the phone pole is your salesperson, and you come in with all these different approaches to connect with them, and you come in with the best of intentions, but by the time they get to the salesperson, it's chaos between your incentives, all your different offers and emails and everything that you're putting out there, and all your competitors and their own employers. This salesperson is just embedded in chaos. They don't know where to turn. They don't know what to do. So the key question you need to be asking is, how do you get untangled? And Barry, how do we?
Well, it really comes down to asking yourself sort of two questions. Which of these things represents your organization today? Are you designing on default, essentially taking the same structures, the same approach year over year and repeating it, hoping to get a similar or better result? Same promotions, same contests. And are you largely looking at your sales force as a homogeneous audience and maybe even thinking of them pretty similar to the way you would have, say, a decade ago? That's designing on default. We don't recommend it. So designing with intention means a shift to really adapt to this evolution of the market, where you're looking at your incentive strategy as a strategy. an integrated strategy where you're also looking to seek relationships, not just incent a final behavior. And to the extent you can, you're also personalizing that experience. And the way that we expect in almost all experiences today, salespeople are no different, expecting something to feel relevant to them and the tools they need given to them at the right time. But designing with intention is a challenging thing to do. It's not something that's easy for an organization that is used to designing on default to switch to.
Yeah, so the key to designing with intention, to combating that powerful urge to just default to what's been done, is following a process. It's having steps where you evaluate what's being done and you don't just make an assumption. So we're going to walk you through the 5 critical components, these 5 absolutely important steps where you need to stop and ask, do I have the right information? Do I know what I'm doing? Have I evaluated whether I'm just repeating last year? And it starts with the salespeople and then the behavior that you're going to ask them to do. You have to wrap who they are and what you need in an experience that goes beyond the incentive. Your decisions there should be driven by data analytics and prediction and should also serve to improve the analytics you can deliver and the power of your prediction. And ultimately, you're driving for relationships in that higher picture.
And Donna, I think it's good to repeat, where do we start on this model?
Starts with what Meritz loves most. It starts with people.
Yeah, it starts with people. It's so critical. We believe that if you start anywhere else in the model, you're probably sub-optimized. And it actually starts with something very specific, which is it starts in this case with understanding that your salespeople are people. And that may sound super obvious, but we oftentimes think of salespeople, as we said earlier, in that reductive way. And so we miss that many of the same ways that we would interact with any other audience can be applied effectively here. So let's step back just for a second and unpack that a bit. What does that mean, thinking of salespeople as people? Well, how do we think of people as people? Well, in the motivation space, certainly there are many ways to approach it, but this is one model that we found very effective for just getting your mindset shifted into a different way of thinking about them. And really it's just asking 2 questions of any audience, which is what will motivate them? Is it something extrinsic, something outside of themselves, like pay or bonus or status? Or is it something internal, something that's more internal, like a set of values or a drive to achieve mastery? And then when you know that, then ask how deeply committed are they to this experience that is engaging them through those kinds of motivators. And what you end up with when you think of this kind of a model is you can start to divide your audience into at least 4 segments. You have your extrinsically motivated, low commitment people. Those are essentially people who say, well, I'm here, but I'm here because either I have a lack of drive to be somewhere else, or there are some consequences that I'm trying to avoid, and being here helps me avoid them. At the high end of extrinsic commitment, you have people who say, I'm here, I'm really invested, but it's because of the reward, the payout, the benefit that I receive. On the intrinsic side of the model, at the low end of commitment, you have people who connect to an experience because there is something meaningful to them that they see as valuable to them to be there for, but they're probably not giving it their all. And at the high end of intrinsic commitment, you have people who literally say, this is part of my identity. I'm very connected to what you're doing, and I see it as aligned with my own values. Now, this is any human experience you could apply this framework to, but that also means that we can apply it to salespeople because they are also people. So what might that look like? At that low commitment extrinsic, you probably have some people in the organization who might say, I'm just here because I need to pay my bills. And those may be people with very low commitment who would be okay going somewhere else. At the high end, you probably have some of your top salespeople saying, I'm here because of commissions and incentives. That's 100% what is driving my behavior and my decision to be selling for you. At the low end of intrinsic motivated commitment, you have people that are probably saying there's something about what you offer as a company that I feel good about selling, but I'm just not that driven. I'm selling for you, but I'm probably working harder for other companies. And at that high end of extrinsic commitment, you have people saying, I'm selling for you because I believe in your products and your services, but I've also made this part of my identity. And so one really valuable question you could ask is, where does your sales organization show up within this kind of a framework? What do they look like in this model?
Thank you, Barry and Dawn. And now we'd like to ask all of you where your sales channel, the mindset of your channel salespeople falls Is it, I'm here because I need to pay my bills? The commissions or incentives are strong. I appreciate your products, but I'm not all in. Or selling your products is part of my identity. If you could select one answer and click submit, then we will share those results shortly. It looks like we're about to get the majority of people submitting their answers, so I'll give it just another moment before we close the poll. All right, I will close the poll and share the results. And it looks like most people are saying selling your products is part of my identity. Barry and Dawn, can you offer some insight into that?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, Dawn, I think that's pretty fantastic that we have an audience that has that distribution on the identity side of it for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised by, the three dominant categories here, and seeing that there is a healthy mix is important to understand that it's not all dominated by one, but there is dispersion amongst the salespeople.
Right, and that's really the reality, right? Which is that your sales channel is not going to all fall in one of those groups. It's going to be distributed across this model, and how it's uniquely distributed for you is what's going to be important to know.
It's also important to consider what are you doing today and how are you aligned, your strategies and your programs, where do they fit on the model? And the reality is that most of your incentive programs, despite their best intention, still really push people into this upper left quadrant where they're highly extrinsically motivated, they're really here, they're excited to work for you, but if that incentive went away today, they would be gone tomorrow. And we really, through this intentional design process, we're working to get to a more balanced approach with intrinsic motivators being activated. Many of you are already here, which is fantastic, but you also have to have programs that address this audience so you don't begin to crowd out their intrinsic motivation. So this intentional design process is really about ensuring that you maintain that high commitment, but you start pulling in other motivators outside of incentives.
Yeah, I think that's the really critical piece of this, that for those of you who answered on the poll, that you're in that category with at least many of your salespeople, that intrinsically motivated high commitment, is what about your incentive strategy is leaning into that? Is it sort of just organically happening on its own? Or have you begun to adjust your approach to incentives to motivation that really could drive a higher percentage of your channel salespeople to be there? And being intentional about that is really what we're advocating today, and redesigning in order to do that is something that's very, very possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So now with an understanding of your salespeople, if you follow this process, you've intentionally begun to unpack why are they here and how do they relate with me. Your strategy needs to start asking, what is the behavior that I'm going to ask them for in every element of my strategy? And it's not singular. It's not always one behavior. So what's the portfolio of behaviors we're going to work with? And really, we are advocating that you are looking at behaviors more complicated than maybe what you're currently measuring, which is that goal of final sales. We talked earlier that there's so much more that a salesperson is doing to get you to that sales number. They're doing pre-sale activities on every single sale they do, demos, on-site visits, presentations. They're taking those actions. And they're also developing critical skills that make them better at every sale. They're attending training. They're going to industry events. They're building a network. These behaviors are often absent, especially in a strategy addressing a channel sales force. And then equally important, as organizations pick up additional ways to generate revenue, you're not just stopping with the final product sale, but you need to be looking at those ongoing success behaviors that a salesperson is doing to create renewals, customer satisfaction, all those other metrics that help you with your subscription services and data revenue. Those behaviors are often also absent from motivation programs. And I think when talking to an organization that sells through a channel, the most important thing we want to impart is that if these behaviors aren't a part of your current strategy because you don't have the data to know these behaviors, this absolutely must be part of your plan going forward. You need to be thinking, what behaviors can I capture now? How do I get more knowledge about what my salespeople are doing before and after the sale, to be able to understand where can I really start to put change in those behaviors to drive more growth for me? And if it's not something you have now, you need to be planning for how to get it in the future. And once you have a good understanding, you now know your people, you know the behavior that's going to work for your business and also work for your salespeople. Your strategy needs to focus on an experience instead of just an outcome like a payout or an incentive. If you really want to maximize the investment of your sales motivation strategy, you have to have a well-rounded experience. And this means—
Dawn, let me interject real quick, because here, what's really important about this across all the audiences that we work with at Merits, whether it's employees, it's salespeople, or it's consumers, this is the demand we're actually hearing from all three audiences. Is it's not enough anymore to just provide me with an incentive, but I expect you to give me an experience that is tailored to me, is relevant to who I am, is sometimes a little surprising, and makes me feel like you're offering something that's different elsewhere. And so I don't think we can actually underestimate how important this piece is to this process.
Absolutely. And again, important to reiterate that your salespeople are also someone's employees and someone's customers. So what we see happening on those sides of the market is equally important for you to recognize now, because you don't just, wear a channel salesperson hat and now you're done and that's all you focus on. You wear the experience you get from every person you interact with in every organization. So really, we like to start this experience by talking about what are you doing beyond an incentive? How have you activated other drivers to drive behavior? Things like recognition as a surprise and delight, training for mastery, communication for simple awareness. What other things are you doing that are not just additive to the results of your investment, but can be multipliers of the investment that you put in? Also, using that reward moment as a real moment to define experience. So often rewards are just seen as, okay, this is the payout I'm going to give. This is what it's going to cost my organization. Give them a check, call it a day. And then you're way undervaluing the power of reward. Turning this into something that becomes memorable instead of just something that disappears into the bank account really amplifies the value of your investment. And your reward is a big part of your investment in an incentive program. So don't undervalue it. And then ultimately, as Barry said, we're looking for personalization. Customers every day experience hyper-personalization from brands. You get a promotion that's perfectly tailored to the behavior that you want to do. It's set at a stretch but achievable goal where I might have to go out of my way once or twice, but I know I can hit that. And that's the experience that people are coming to your channel sales program expecting. They don't want to be given a promotion that I know I can't win. I know this isn't for me, so I'm just going to move on to someone who's more interested in my potential. So you have to start personalizing, bringing this down to how do they want to be talked to, what are they most interested in, what's relevant to their problems now, and what solution are they a part of in the future. That personalization cannot be understated.
And I think a great way to think about that is just to remind yourself that today everybody is a consumer. No matter what role they're in, they're a consumer, they expect a consumer experience. And so what do we do when we want to personalize an experience? We go to data.
Yeah, your data is your most powerful tool now, and it's also probably the weakest one that you can work to be building. You need to be using your data to do more than just reporting. And in-flight analysis and making adjustments as chaos reigns, as COVID hit, organizations needed to look at their data and see where do we need to tweak. That's just table stakes. That's a necessity for being a good partner. But if you want your program to perform to its max potential, you need to be taking advantage of your data to do prediction, to both predict what's going to happen and tweak your approach to optimize that, and then track performance over time so that you can improve your predictive power. And if you don't have this information now, if your data is pretty immature, the best way to bring prediction to maturity is to take an experimental mindset when you're putting a design in. Now, pure academic experiment is not always a fair reality. Having a control group, not talking to them at all, and putting a strategy in place for other people, that's not always going to fly. But you can do more test and learn. Try things out with a small population. Give everyone a slightly different treatment. And see what works best. That's going to help your prediction improve so much faster than just deploying something to everyone, waiting for the results, and then tweaking it and deploying again. You can bring your prediction up to speed so much faster with experimentation. And that's exactly what we saw in this example we're going to walk you through really quickly, where we had an organization that looked probably like a lot of channel sales organization programs. They had tiers. They ran these tiers year after year. And with predictive analytics and a keen eye on the data analysis, we were able to look at, hey, your program and your tiers are getting pretty stale. People are reacting to them. We're not seeing maybe as much push. Now's the time to shift those anchor points, shift that tier threshold. And we're not worried about it scaring your people away. We know they're going to continue to drive for this, and we can predict how strongly they're going to react. And we were able to put these tiers at the perfect stretch but achievable goal for the majority of people to continue to achieve, to hit that push and hit that tier. And that was worth for this organization an additional $50 million in incremental revenue. So having great prediction and using data analysis in your strategy can really pay out fast. But ultimately, you know, that's still looking at program performance as the outcome. It's looking at that sales behavior. And the last point we want to leave you with today is just urging you to measure your success beyond the bottom line. It means that your success of your channel sales program, of any sales motivation strategy, needs to be looking at the quality and value of the relationship that you've created. This relationship needs to get measured by the kinds of behaviors you're seeing people do without having to put an incentive in place. Whether these people are saying they're advocates for you, whether you see market share shifting in your direction, all of those things start to evaluate, is this relationship really valuable? Is this channel sales partner now my partner versus anyone else's? So you'll know that your strategy is ultimately successful if it's helping you build a stronger relationship between that salesperson and your brand. But it's not solely self-serving. If you're self-serving here, your salespeople will know it, they'll sniff it out, and then they're not going to be as committed. But if you're really intentional and really committed to making that salesperson's job easier and being their partner, you're going to be helping them also build stronger relationships with their customers. You're going to help them be a better salesperson. You're going to help them know what their customers need faster and better. And that's ultimately the true value of that relationship for them.
And I think where this might leave an organization is, can I come up with a metric that is meaningful for me, which is return on relationship? And you absolutely can. But it definitely starts with the foundation that we said earlier, these 5 critical components, because you can't just jump to relationship. You really need to build to that by rethinking this evolution of the market and bringing in these components of starting with the salespeople. People are at the center of this. Understanding what the complexity of the behaviors are that you really need to deliver, which are not just the final sale behavior. Moving out beyond that, you need to wrap that in an experience, not just an incentive, but something that actually will connect through in a human way and keep them attentive to your messages, but also loyal and retained around your products and services that you want to sell. Ultimately, then, of course, data analysis and prediction will become critical because you want to know what's going to happen next, and you're going to want to be able to prepare for that. And then measure that not just by the end sale, but whether you're building relationships with those customers through your channel that are sticky, that bring your brand clear through every one of those transactions. So it becomes amplified through the channel rather than being diminished as it moves forward. And that really, Dawn, is the model that we've seen be successful in delivering this higher level of performance.
These are really the steps that you take if you want to go from default and automatic to intentional and purposeful in your sales motivation strategy.
So with that, I think we have a few minutes left that we could answer some questions.
Thank you, Barry and Dawn. Yes, in just a few moments, we will answer some questions submitted during today's webinar. And as a reminder, you can use the questions pane in the control panel to ask questions at any time. And we do have some great questions coming in. Let's see. The first one we have is, you say that relationships are the ultimate measure of success for a program. What is one way we can measure a relationship?
Yep, so there are a couple ways actually you can approach that. One is certainly you can do a well-designed survey methodology of your customer base. So find out what is resulting from an attitudinal perspective from your channel interaction. Are your customers feeling like there's something more than a transaction happening there? Do they feel some commitment? Do they feel like they're getting a great experience? So as much as you want to engage your channel partner, you need to know that your channel partner is creating that same level of engagement with the customer. The other thing I would say about that is you certainly can know what the behaviors are that are leading to deeper relationship. A good application of behavioral science would reveal certain things that people can do, from expressing empathy to communicating at the right time, that we know are ways that human beings connect better to other humans. And you can begin to measure which of your channel salespeople are exhibiting those behaviors, and is that increasing the relationship with that customer? Is it actually creating better financial outcomes because of that tighter relationship?
That's great. Our next question is, what advice would you give to an organization who is hesitant to change their incentive program from what they've always done?
That's a good, Dawn loves that question. She gets that very often.
Yeah, I have empathy for those individuals. It is risky. It is scary to begin to unpack programs that have been running for decades. So to an organization that's afraid to do it, I would say start small. Start with a couple of tiny experiments to begin to test out other ways to approach this, whether that's including something other than an incentive in your annual program, or just tweaking how you communicate, doing some surveying. If you're really scared, start to prove out the value of making some changes by just testing a little bit. But also be aware that if you're not willing to adapt, your competitors will. New competitors will come in with a program they've never had before. Old competitors will have new leadership that says, we want to try something totally new. So if you're scared, you need to be prepared that if you're not willing to change, you may be forced to change anyway. So it's always better to be a willing participant in that change than be reacting to what your competitors are putting out there.
That's great. And we have one additional question coming in. What is more important to drive high program engagement? The types of rewards and incentives you offer, or the rule structure?
I mean, is C none of the above? I think it's the experience that wraps up all of those things that's actually most important to get program engagement. So the types of incentives you run are really great for offering variety and capturing attention. The rewards are absolutely critical, ensuring that it's not just something they'll forget about later, but something they're truly engaging with. And your rule structures can offer some changes in behavior and leverage some different structures to make sure you capture everybody's interests and aren't just maybe focused on top performers. But ultimately, it's the experience that all of those things support that's most critical to get right.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I think if your mindset is, well, our program is really just about our rewards, or it's really just about the rule structure, or maybe it's about how you communicate, you're really exposing yourself, though, then to saying, because if that one piece is not always completely optimized and isn't better than what the competitor's doing, then you're exposed. But if, as Dawn points out, you're creating an experience where multiple components are coming together to create something that's really unique, and is really connecting through, gaining attention and driving behavior, then you always have all those different pieces to play with, and the interaction will be really important. So it absolutely is about the experience, not about any given component of it that really will drive to the highest results for you.
Well, Barry and Dawn, thank you so much for leading us today. And attendees, if you have any other questions about the topics we explored, please reach out to motivationmarketing@merits.com. On behalf of Merits Motivation and our presenters, we thank you for joining us today and look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.